Hi, and thanks for joining our webinar. My name is Nina Falcone, and I work in the marketing department here at LaSalle Network. And today we're joined by our founder and CEO, Tom Gimbel, who's going to teach us the secret to having a successful interview. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about what we do here. LaSalle is a staffing and recruiting firm headquartered in Chicago that specializes in accounting and finance, administrative, call center, marketing, human resources, technology, executive search, healthcare revenue cycle, and supply chain roles, and that list just keeps growing. Tom started the company when he was only 26, and over the last 17 years, he's become a nationally recognized expert on company culture, interviewing, and hiring. You may have even seen him on your TV. He's been featured everywhere from the Today Show to CNBC, Fox and Friends, and he's also a contributor for Inc. and Fortune magazine. So during this webinar, you can join the conversation with us by tweeting at LaSalle Network and directly at Tom at Tom Gimbel, and by using the hashtag #InterviewSecrets. At the end of the webinar, we'll be answering your questions, which can be sent in through the box on the right-hand side of your screen or on Twitter. So now, Tom, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Nina. Good morning, Wolverine Nation. Glad to be with you guys today. And I think it's probably the most important thing that when it comes to careers, it's one of the oldest, but yet there's a reason that it keeps getting brought into the forefront, and I'm talking about interviewing, is because you can't do a good job if you don't have a job. You can't leave a bad job if you can't get a new one. And it's something that gets overlooked with the more experience we get in the marketplace. We tend to believe that, and even more so, with our the personal brand that's been that conversation that's been created over the past few years. People think that the personal brand is the most important thing, and they put the interview as an afterthought. And so when you're going out in the workforce and you're starting your career, you have to look at how do you get a job? How do you have a successful interview? How do you get somebody else to like you? And there's a lot that goes back and forth. A good interview is like a tennis rally. And you got to keep the ball going over the net. And sometimes there's some hard shots, and those are the ones you feel really good about. Sometimes you just have an easy one, and you hit it back really hard. And at the same time, you also want to be asking them questions. But you've got to remember, it is a two-way street. But at the end of the day, even in a market that is an employee's market, employers are still the ones that have to offer you the job. You can't turn down something you've never been offered. Right? And you can only accept something you've been invited to. So when you look at what's at stake, if you're a $100,000 a year person and you're going to average that over the course of your career, right, over 40 years of working, that's $4 million. And that's if you average 100,000. It obviously exponentially goes up, and the more you make. And so you've got to look at this and saying every interview you go on is potentially minimally a $4 million deal, because it sets the table for the next job and the next job and the next job. And so that when we get into the secret of successful interviews, it's not just what you do, it's understanding the situation that you're in. And in interviews, it's kind of like the Super Bowl, right? Is the Super Bowl really different than any other football game? They both have the same amount of players on offense and defense. They both have a flip of the coin to start it. They both have special teams, and field goals and touchdowns are 6 points, extra points are 1 or 2 points, and a field goal is 3. But the Super Bowl has more importance. Well, talking about yourself and knowing what you want, it's the same no matter where you do it. But when you're in an interview and you're sitting across the table from somebody that can make a decision on where you work and how much you make and the necessity to have you on board, that's different than just sitting around and talking. So I think you've got to realize that you've got to be yourself, and at the same time, you've got to make a great impression. And so you've got to realize you don't want to necessarily open up the kimono entirely, and at the same time, you never want to lie. So the agenda for what we're going to talk about today is, number one, going the extra mile. What does it really mean, right? We put it in the slide because it's something that people talk about, but what's the definition of the extra mile? So I'll tell you what, you can walk a mile, you can sprint a mile, you can get in a car and drive a mile. There's a lot of different ways to go the extra mile, and you've got to be able to drill past the cliches, right? First impression, fairly basic. Common mistakes, answering questions, asking questions, and then how do you follow up, right? So goal is for this to take another 35 or 40 minutes, and we'll get through it. Sometimes it goes faster, sometimes it goes shorter, and open it up to questions. Because when it comes to the interviewing, there really aren't dumb questions, because a lot of times, and I mean of how to interview and how to accomplish a successful interview. There are dumb questions when you're actually in the interview, and we've got to talk about that too, of how to overcome that. So let's talk about going the extra mile. Right? This starts before the actual interview. You've got to research the company, and you've got to know what others are saying about the company. How do you do that? You have the obvious social media, right? Go on LinkedIn. How many employees? How many followers? What are people writing about it? You can go on Facebook. Right? Go on Twitter. There's a lot of different avenues. But at the end of the day, you at least have to know how the company presents itself. So you want to get on Facebook. You want to get on their website and see how the company promotes its own brand. Are they active? Now, it all depends. If you're in marketing versus operations versus sales versus legal versus administrative, call centers, it doesn't make a difference. You need to find out how they go to market, what they do, who their clients are, who their customer base is. Then you have to look at going the extra mile in the interview. So I had an employee who came in to want to work for me in our marketing and public relations department. And she came in, she had a good interview, and then she said, what if I could get you a mention in a magazine? Is that something you'd be interested in? And I said, of course. Before she even had a job, she went out and got us a mention in a magazine, right? That's going the extra mile to say that. To create, you can wait for a client, you can wait in a company, a lot of companies will assign projects to potential employees. Can you put a PowerPoint slide together stating what you do in your first 30 days or 90 days? How would you attack this problem or that problem? But I can't tell you what we instruct our clients to do, what we do internally. We look for candidates that say, can I do a project for you to show you what my work level's like? Can I put together a 30, 60, 90-day plan for what I think? Right? Proactive communication, that's going the extra mile. But if you don't know what the company does and what they do to go to market, how can you really go that extra mile? So at the very least, you need to know that. Then you need to know the profiles of the people you'll be interviewing with. Bring notes. I gotta tell you, interviewing, it's an open book test, right? Doesn't mean you're gonna lay everything out and go through it all the time, but no one's expecting a candidate who's probably interviewing for 3, 4, 5, 6 jobs at a time, potentially, to know everything about everything. But to have research there, to have the LinkedIn profiles, to know where people who you're meeting with went to college, to know where they worked before, to want to know why they left this company and went to that company. Very important stuff to want to know. And with LinkedIn, you've got the biggest database in the world that'll tell you pretty much everything there is to know about the people you're potentially meeting with. So let's get into the first impression. We live in a world where everybody doesn't wear a suit and tie anymore. Right? But clothing and appearance is still important. And just because you go to interview with a group that wears jeans and T-shirts doesn't mean you wear jeans and T-shirts. Now, I wouldn't wear a suit and a tie, but I'm gonna wear slacks and a blazer. If I'm on the West Coast, I may wear jeans and a blazer and a dress shirt. Right? You're not there to show off that you're the coolest kid in school. You're there to show off that you're a professional and you're coming in. Now, it depends at the higher levels. If you're going in and you have a reputation in the marketplace and you've been recruited, right, and it's an informational, that's different. That's different. But that's really, at that point, you're not listening to this webinar. This webinar is how to make the successful tips for having a successful interview, right? And when you're interviewing with people that you don't know for a job that you do want, making that first impression is really important. Eye contact, confidence. You need to practice. You need to practice interviewing. You need to practice. You need to look in the mirror. I mean, the old stories about bad breath, smelling like cigarettes, too much perfume, not having your hair combed, all that stuff is real and true, right? If your glasses, if you're wearing the same pair of glasses that you wore in the 90s, that's probably an issue, because may not be hiring you to be their lawyer because you've got the greatest fashion sense, but being self-aware is important. And what I can tell you is this, unequivocally. Being up to date, not trendy, but being up to date rarely results in not getting hired. Why give somebody a reason to not want to hire you? You don't need to come in looking like you're on the cover of GQ magazine or Elle magazine or whatever they're called, right? But to look like you were alive and working and present in this century, this decade, this year, goes a long way, okay? The handshake. You're not meeting the Queen of England, okay? You don't need to shake somebody's fingertips. Give them a handshake. And this has been said for decades. You don't need to go in and squeeze them like you're a bodybuilder, and you don't need to squeeze their fingertips like you're meeting royalty, right? A good, nice, firm handshake. Not a wet fish, not too hard, right? But a good handshake, like you're there for business. Be polite. I can't tell you how many clients we have that rule people out because they've got bad manners. You come into the office, you're talking to people, always be nice in the elevator. Be nice to the security guards. Be nice to the receptionists. Be nice to the executive assistant, to the folks you're meeting with. Always be polite and be nice. That's what it comes. And then your voice, right? Look people in the eye. And then I'm going to give you a little white lie that you want to tell. If you get an interview and you happen to have a cold or the sniffles, right? People don't like to be around those people, right? It puts people at ease, makes people feel uncomfortable from the get-go. So if you've got a cold and you don't want to give up the interview, which I totally understand, my advice to you is acknowledge that you have allergies. It may sound like the silliest thing in the world, but when someone thinks you have a cold, they're turned off immediately. These are little things you've got to look at and behave accordingly. Okay? Common mistakes. Now, I'm giving you this data because my company has placed tens of thousands of people, right? We do temporary staffing. We do permanent search. We've placed CFOs making $350,000 a year. We've placed people entry-level out of college making $35,000 a year, right? And everything in between. Accounting, finance, marketing, human resources, administrative, doesn't make a difference. Sales, marketing, doesn't make a difference, right? And I have seen these problems come up time and time again. And you may think that they won't apply to you, or I'm telling you they apply to everybody, and I've seen people get bit in the rear end time and time again for the littlest things. The common mistake, disinterested, 55%. If an interviewer leaves their door open, you can't keep rotating your head every time somebody walks by their office. You've got to stay focused on them. Looking out the window, don't get disturbed or bothered by window washers or anything else that's going on outside. Your focus is the person in front of you. For $4 million, right, $100,000 a year, 40 years, $4 million. If you can't focus on the person you're talking to for the half hour or an hour that you're in the room with them, then go see your doctor and see if you have ADHD. Okay? Focus one-on-one with the person you're in the room with. Arrogant, 53%. Disinterested and arrogance get confused all the time. Aloofness and arrogance confused all the time. Right? Don't lean back. You're not at the beach club, right? Sit up straight. When you're making a point, lean forward. Engage in dialogue. Be humble. Uninformed. I'm telling you what every hiring manager and human resources person thinks. You have LinkedIn. You have the internet. You can get on our website. Why are you asking me a question about what we do that is right there on the homepage? And then asking bad questions. Everyone's perception is different of what a good question and a bad question is. Right? You've got to be intelligent enough to understand what good questions are. You got to think about why you'd want a job. What's the management style like? Tell me about their good performers and their bad performers, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But to ask a question, to sit down with the CEO of the company and ask him or her what day the health insurance kicks in, right? You're sitting down with the person that runs the company. That's a human resources question. You have her attention for a half hour. and you can talk about where the company's going, the vision of what they're doing, how they grade high potential employees, right? To ask what the vacation policy is, while important to you, that's not the forum to be asking it. When there's 2 or 3 other people during the process, you can ask that question to. And then look at the surrounding bubbles, right? Playing with your hair or touching your face, 24%. Fidgeting, moving around back and forth. Failing to smile, 44%, right? You've got to have some self-awareness of your facial expression, right? Trends all over the internet of resting you-know-what face, and you got to get past that. You got to smile, right? You got to smile. If you didn't want to, if they didn't want you to smile, you'd be born with bad teeth. I guess technically you're born with no teeth, and then they grow. But you got to be open and honest and realize that a smile. You got to be honest with yourself and realize that smiling conveys happiness. People buy happiness. People don't buy misery. There aren't secret answers to interview questions, and I think that's something that people lose track of all the time. They think there's this secret sauce. How do you answer a behavioral interviewing question? How do you answer a question about where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years, right? The key is you can't fail at knowing you. You need to know you. You need to know what you want out of your career, what you want out of your next job, right? If you want work-life balance, that's okay. And a company that doesn't have work-life balance and it's all type A, 150 miles an hour people all the time, guess what? That's not the right place for you. And to try to get one of those companies to create a work-life balance for you is going to result in a miserable exit down the road if you get the job. Right? You can't be ashamed of what you want, and you've got to go to a company that has the same values and belief systems as what you're looking for. And then when you're honest, right? When you're honest, you're going to know that interview questions are truly about trying to find the right home. Going to work for a company that doesn't have transparency, that doesn't talk about how they do things, there's a lot of companies that'll do that, and you can find the ones that are going to be the most open and honest and transparent. Okay? So when it comes to being honest, why are you looking to leave? What's your biggest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years and 10 years? Why are you looking? I can't tell you how many people that have been fired from a job go into an interview, ask why they're leaving, they make up a big lie about why they quit. The company does a reference, not even a behind-the-scenes reference. They do a legitimate reference with human resources of the hiring manager, and they say, we let him go. We let her go. Be honest. The interview is done. The job opportunity is lost. I was fired. I was let go because of A, B, and C. And let me tell you, did I learn a lesson? What's your biggest weakness? There's been books written about this. There's been TV shows talked about this and movie clips and the whole 9 yards. You can't say your biggest weakness is being too hard of a worker. Your biggest weakness is doing everything perfectly, right? Those aren't weaknesses. Right? There's real weaknesses that we all have. I'm not good with spreadsheets, right? I've been working for years to become more analytical, and I'm taking a statistics class at the community college, right? Those are weaknesses with solutions, right? Sometimes when I lose a deal, I go into a little bit of a stupor for a couple days on the sales side. Whatever. But honest, real weaknesses. And then a solution for how you're looking to overcome those. That's legitimate. That's real. That's what people want to hire. Where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? If you don't know, say you don't know. I think the bigger question that I like people to say is, I guess the bigger question is, in 5 years at this company, What are my opportunities, right? I know that at my last company, the reason I'm leaving is because I couldn't see myself there in 5 years. I want to be at a company where I see myself wanting to be 5 years from now, and then talking about that. The key is you can't be defensive. The biggest mistake I see so many employees or candidates make in interviews is they get defensive on questions. Your job is to create solutions and to share more about yourself, not be defensive of what you have done or have not done. You gotta remember, when you go to work out, and people get personal trainers, they want to be pushed and they want to be challenged. When you go into an interview and at your job, it's the exact same thing. You want somebody to push you to think about things differently and to get your brain thinking in a different way. You're willing to look like a goofball jumping around the gym with a personal trainer with a rubber band around your legs, but yet you go into an interview and you're not willing to be uncomfortable and to answer questions that may be a little off kilter or behavioral, and to admit your weaknesses. As companies are growing, and it's become an employee market to an extent now, but as companies are growing and the economy's in a little bit of an interesting place, right? Stock market's down and all those other things, is you've got to realize that companies want to hire people who are self-motivated, who are communicative, who are honest, who are about self-improvement, and who are most importantly going to add to their culture, right? We live in a world where 15 or 20 years ago, it was very much more metrics driven. It was coming out of the Jack Welch, GE, cut your bottom 10%. Now we're in a place that says build a culture and attract good people who want to be in that culture, and a great culture will self-regulate. You've got to show them through how you answer questions and the questions you ask that you're going to be somebody who's going to add value to their culture. So we've got the airplane test, right? So basic. And there's reciprocity here. It's reciprocal, okay? Are you somebody that your boss, your hiring manager, would want to sit next to for a 3.5 or 4 hour airplane trip in coach with no movie? And is the manager somebody you would want to sit next to for 3.5 or 4 hours under those same situations? Right? If the answer is no, don't want the job just because you want the job. Sometimes you got to know that it's not the right job for you, and they need to know you're not the right person for them. But if you don't like somebody, that is a terrible way to start a relationship. And that's what an employee-employer is, right? It's a relationship. And you got to think about relationships. How many friends do you have that you don't like hanging out with? Well, I don't have to be friends with people I work with. You know, I've never understood that. You're with the people you work with more than you're with your friends. Shouldn't you like them? You may not like all of them because there's 50, 100, 150, 500, 5,000 people that work there. But the people that you're going to be working for, your manager, types of people, I think you should like those people. So when you have to ask questions, you're now in this interview, right? They've asked you behavioral questions. They've asked you about your weaknesses and strengths. Now it's your turn. Do you have any questions for me? Right? The worst thing you can do is say, I don't have any questions. The second worst thing you can say is, I've met with 3 or 4 or 5 people here and they've answered all my questions already. The inquisitiveness to want to know, to want to ask the same question to different people and see if their answers are similar or different is an important quality. And it's a very easy litmus test for you to see if there's truthfulness going on within the organization. Now, there may be people from different units or different departments that don't have the same answers, and you've got to have perspective to know that that's logical. But on the philosophical questions about the company and the culture and the group, then you got to trust the people you're talking to. And this is a great time to bring that up. But what you want to ask, do you have any hesitations about my background? Right then and there, you've got the hiring manager or a senior person in the department, and you can say, is there anything on my background that you don't think makes me a good candidate for this job? Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it gives you the opportunity that if they're truthful back and tell you something, you can answer it. So don't fail knowing you. Why did the last person succeed or fail in this role? Very few people ask this question. Why did the person in this role currently or most recently fail? Not necessarily what made them succeed. They got promoted. But what about the people who failed in it? Tell me why they failed. What makes you different than your competitors? Right? You've been on their website, you've seen who their competitors are, but what makes them different? Is there something truly unique? Can you share an employee in this department's progression? Where did they start? Where did they get to? Where are they now? Tell me about the worst performance of someone on your team. I want to know about the person. Why would you want to know about the worst? Hey, I want to know where the potholes are on the road. I want to find out, what if I have a similar characteristic to that person? Don't ask, how much paid time off would I get? It's a human resources question, right? When they give you the offer, they're going to give you a benefits package, and if they don't, you can ask then. What does the job pay? Right? Now, this is a little bit interesting because if you're working through a recruiter, they should have told you. If you're working directly with the company and you got an interview, you would think that it would be in an ad posting that you responded to. But there are some companies that do bait and switches, and you need to be aware of that. And if you're talking to a human resources person. But in the first interview, you never want to ask what the job pays. How is your health insurance? Again, you have to assume that there's going to be a benefit package that's going to include health insurance. Now, with the Affordable Care Act, right, health insurance is a lot more readily available to everybody than it was before. So health insurance hasn't been as big of an issue as I would have said it was more than 2 years ago. Why are so many people quitting? Right? So you might be able to track this data on LinkedIn if you see a lot of people who aren't there anymore. But that's not how you ask the question. You go, you know what, I was doing some research and I saw on LinkedIn, and it looks like there's been some turnover. And I was curious if there's something going on of management or what's great. There's different ways to phrase things. What does your company do? You should know that. Right? You've been on the website. You're interviewing for the job. There's a reason you wanted to do it. How do you do background checks? Woohoo! Big red flag on that. Right? If you've got a situation, right, when you were in college, you had a misdemeanor for whatever, right? Or it's something serious. You had a DUI or you had something else as an adult, right? It's a very valid question, but that's called being upfront and initiating the conversation with that at the right time. Saying, I want to be upfront with you. I'd love this job. However, I had this situation happen to me and I want to be upfront with you, right? How quickly can I get promoted? You're going to get that answer when you've asked a different question of, tell me about the success story and the track record of somebody else in the department, right? Because the number one answer to how quickly can I get promoted is really just answering with another question. Tell me how hard you're going to work and how good your work product is going to be. And if you say fantastic, you're now in the situation of overpromising. Because anything short of fantastic puts you in a very, very, very bad place. So let me get to following up. Basic, easy, everybody knows how to do it. Well, I got to tell you, I went through an epiphany on this. If you had asked me 3 years ago, I would have said, you write a letter. Type it, handwrite it, thank them for their time. In this day and age, you have hoteling concepts, you have people traveling all the time. Somebody may not get a thank you note from you for 2, 3, 4 weeks, if they ever get it, right? I think it's nice, and I think it's a great touch, and it's a good add-on, but it's all about email. My advice to you, don't do it from your phone. Do it from a desktop or a laptop. Take the time, use spell check, make sure you have the right email address. It keeps a record of your sent emails. Right? Phones get screwy. Did it go through? Did it not go through? Right? but take the time to reread it 3 or 4 times. Be clear and concise. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to meet with me. I enjoyed learning more about your company and how you guys are tackling the market. I'm confident that my experiences at ABC Company can translate over to what your company's doing and add value. Right? Reassure me. Reassure the hiring manager that you have the forethought that based on your past experiences and your knowledge of my company that you can add value. That's called clear and concise communication. Text message. No. Don't do it. Okay? You are not their friend. You are not their friend. You are interviewing for a job. Send them an email. Send them an email. The big question I get all the time is, I should link in with them, correct? Well, it's a very, very interesting question. And you got to be very delicate. You're going to meet a lot of people out there. And 2 things. Number 1, if you're currently working and you link in with all the people at a company you're interviewing with, that shows up, right? So just from a sense of self-preservation, you don't need to advertise to the world that you're interviewing for a job, right? So have some self-perspective on that. Secondly, you don't need to link in immediately with somebody that you interviewed with. It can be a couple days later and go that way. Okay? And certain people with LinkedIn, they want to be friends with everybody or connected to everybody, and others don't. They want it to be purely people that they have a work relationship with. And they may never see you again. Okay? So be very, very wary of inviting too many people too soon to be your LinkedIn connection. So let's recap what our takeaways were. Going the extra mile. What does it mean? You've got to be clear about that. What do you mean you will go? Does it mean you'll work weekends? You'll work nights? You'll come in at 5 in the morning? What does it mean? You have to know what the extra mile is. And then for the interview, you've got to go the extra mile. Doing your research, their webpage, knowing what they do, LinkedIn, who you're meeting with. First impression, look good. Have your clothes be clean. Have your shoes be shined. If you're wearing, I tell you, I've interviewed people at all levels, and I've seen people wear athletic socks with suits, right? Does that mean they're not good at their job? I got to tell you, people make assumptions, and that's a judgment assumption. Right? You never know what will rule you out. So instead of being defensive and saying that being ruled out for something silly and petty is dumb, realize that's their prerogative. Right? This isn't racism or anti-Semitism or discrimination. This is judgment, saying that if you can't dress well for an interview, how are you going to behave or dress with our clients, with our customers, with our vendors? Common mistakes. Be confident, don't be arrogant. Look people in the eye. Have a good handshake. Don't smell of cigarettes, bad breath. Don't wear too much perfume. Better to not wear any perfume on the day of an interview. I've known people that carry the little mini travel bottles of mouthwash in their briefcase or their purse. They use it in the bathroom before they go into interviews. There's very, very easy, inexpensive ways to not make common mistakes. Answering questions. Right? Be truthful. Don't fail knowing you. Good, direct answers. If you want to know the wrong way to answer questions, watch one of these political debates. Democrat or Republican, we're bipartisan here, right? But listen when the moderators ask them a question and they avoid it. And all you wanted them to do is answer the question. Answer the question first. Give your your explanation afterwards. Asking questions. Don't ask the dumb ones. Do your research. Know the basics. Ask about where the opportunities lie. Ask about how success and failure is measured and determined. Right? But good, thorough questions that'll help you make the right decision. Remember, you're interviewing to A, get the job, and B, to gain information so you can make a decision. And then following up. Good grammar. Spell check. Spell people's names correctly. Use email. Don't do text. If you want to write a note to them, do an email as well. Time kills all deals. Send an email. And use a laptop or a desktop rather than a phone. Okay. So a little ahead of schedule. I must have had too much coffee this morning and I talked too quickly. So good news is everybody can squeeze in the second half of their Subway sandwich at their desk after the webinar. But I will hand it over to Nina, and if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks so much, Tom. And yes, we do have a few questions in already. And for those of you listening in, if you haven't sent in your questions yet, just a reminder that you can on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can on Twitter as well using the hashtag #InterviewSecrets. So Tom, the first one that we have in is, how do you recover from making a bad first impression?
Well, now that you've gone through this webinar, we won't have to worry about that anymore. However, if you feel like you made a bad first impression and the interview didn't go well, I've seen this work on several occasions. Send an email to the person that you had the interview with and apologize. Say, I feel that my interview went terribly wrong. I wasn't on my game. I had taken NyQuil last night. I had a death in the family, whatever the reason is, and say, I'd like to get a second chance to interview with you and show you what I'm all about. Right? I've seen that work. It's the best option you have, and it's really the only option you have.
Great, thank you. Another one that just came in is, what do I talk about if I don't have any work experience yet?
So I'm assuming that you graduated from college, you know, have work experience. The first thing I'll tell you is you need an internship, and even if you just graduated, it's not too late to get one. That's a huge positive to get that. The second thing is, what did you do in college? Did you volunteer? Did you do anything for your professors, right? And then thirdly is, you've got to make sure you're applying for jobs that are appropriate. And a lot of times people want to do jobs that sound sexy or fun, and they're not the right jobs for them. You may have to take an entry-level job to get office experience, whether that's doing administrative tasks or whether that's working in a call center or what have you. You've got to get a job that has that experience that you can then go look for your next one.
Great, thank you. Another one just came in and it asked, what do you suggest to international students and job seekers regarding fitting into the culture as well as the language?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And so you got to take a lot of the onus on yourself. And so that is, are you really practicing? There's really two issues. Number one is the language barrier, and only you can work on that. And just like any other skill, it's how much you practice. And the more you practice, the better you do, the more you'll fit in. The second thing is, and that's going to be important in the interview, because if you're going into a job that relies heavy on verbal communication, that's going to be there. Culturally, it's a different issue. And the question that I'd ask back, rhetorically obviously, is, do you want to be a part of a different type of culture? And the answer has nothing to do with ethnicities or what foreign country you're from. It has to do more with philosophical belief, because even for English-speaking candidates, any new company is a new culture. Now, it's easier when you speak the language as your first language, but you've got to willingly want to be a part of it. And what I would tell you is, go to the extracurricular company events. Even if you don't play softball, go to the softball game. Right? If there's a philanthropic committee, go be on those. You may have to give a little bit more of yourself to fit in and to be accepted, but in the right company, if you're working at the right place, it goes very well.
Great, thanks. Another one just came in asking, how can you maintain a relatively long-term professional relationship with someone after meeting with them in the interview?
No, I think you got to realize is that any relationship is reciprocal, right? You can't have a relationship with no one that's if someone's not willing to give back. That's called stalking, right? So it's no different than a parent-child relationship or anything else. If one side doesn't give, eventually it wears thin, and so you've got to figure out why they would want to be in that relationship with you. So if you're 22 and graduating from college with no work experience and you're interviewing with somebody who's got 15 years of experience, you can lay the groundwork and after a few days send them a LinkedIn invitation like we talked about and continue that and ping them. But the best way is if you are in the subordinate role and you want to maintain that professional relationship for years to come, it's to follow them on LinkedIn and where their career is going. And when they do move or get promoted, to send them a note congratulating them, right? And once a year to reach out. And in the beginning, they may not even remember you and say, "Dear Bill, you interviewed me a year or 2 years ago, and while I didn't get the job or I went to work at X company instead, you made an impression on me, and I'd love to keep in touch." But if you do that after 2 weeks, you sound a little crazy. If you do that after 6 months or a year, you sound like somebody who's actually thinking about their network and their future.
Great, thanks. Another person just asked, is it too late to send a thank you email if it has been a week since the interview?
No, it's not too late, but I would acknowledge that. If you're thinking that, they may be thinking that, right? So, dear Mary, I wanted to apologize for the delay in writing this thank you note. However, I had some situations that arose that prohibited me from doing so. I truly enjoyed meeting you, yada, 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 right? It's the problem with email versus, traditional snail mail is that the timestamp is right there for everybody to see.
Great. Another person just asked, I'm looking for internships right now. Do I follow companies on LinkedIn before getting interviewed by them, or do you wait until after?
No, you can follow companies on LinkedIn before because, again, that's your hiring manager. They may see that you're following that, but you're not trying to link in with the individual. So to follow people on LinkedIn before just means you're doing your research and want to know.
Great. And Tom, we'll close it out with one more question. What are some tips you have for someone who might feel nervous before an interview?
Practice more. I think everybody's different, and there's different levels of emotional bandwidth and confidence and how that translates. But we've all watched the videos and the TED Talks and the Michael Jordans, and everybody's got most people have butterflies before doing something that they really want, whether it's asking a boy or a girl out or even going to play in a big game in high school or college or whatever. But waiting in line for a movie you really want to see, sometimes you're nervous and have anxiety, right? So to go into an interview, again, $100,000 a year, $4 million, right? It's understandable, but practice. You've got to practice. You can talk out loud. When you're at home, answer questions verbally out loud. Answer questions that you think might get asked to you. Study your resume. Know the bullet points that you put down. The best way to not be nervous is to be comfortable in your own skin. I mean, to really be comfortable in your own skin. It's not easy. It's hard.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tom. And that will close it out for our questions portion of the webinar. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And if you would like to watch the webinar again, we'll be sending out a recording later on. And if you want even more tips on job search advice, you can follow us on Twitter, again, at LaSalle Network, or you can follow Tom directly at Tom Gimbel. And you can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Google+. Thank you all so much for joining.